Spotlight 180 by Acting Without Boundaries, a unique performing arts programs for people with physical disabilities. To learn more about AWB, please visit www.actingwithoutboundaries.org.
Hello, and welcome back to Spotlight 180, Acting Without Boundaries web-based series where we have a conversation for 3 minutes or 180 seconds. I'm Mary Thomas, and I am a board member of Acting Without Boundaries. And again, I would like to welcome you to our conversation.
And I'm Lisa Abraham, and I'm also on the board. We're thrilled to be here to interview our 2025 Hero Award honoree, whose leadership has changed lives through her advocacy and education. Please welcome this year's Hero Award recipient, Katie Samson.
Hi, Mary. Hi, Lisa. Thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here with you both and everyone else that's going to be watching this.
Now, usually our Spotlight 180s, we try to keep it around 3 minutes of questions and discussion, but considering that there are 3 of us here, we have the green light from AWB staff that we can go as long as we need to.
Well, and since we're all so concise in how we speak and don't drag on. Anyway, okay. Well, I'm so glad everybody's here, and I think we should get started. And I know being concise is not my strong point.
Katie, for those who might not be familiar with your full story, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to the work that you're doing today?
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in Wayne, Pennsylvania, not too far from, where AWB has been working. And I went to Radnor High School. I was really involved in theater when I was young and loved the arts and culture. I ended up going to Middlebury College in Vermont, where I also played lacrosse and still took theater classes when I could and tried to merge both my passions as an athlete as well as being involved in arts. I had a spinal cord injury my sophomore year in college, which I became a quadriplegic. So I'm paralyzed from the chest down. And after that time, you can imagine, I went through just a tremendous change, both the physical embodiment of paralysis and then also sort of the mental and emotional toll that it took. I was really fortunate to experience incredible rehab at McGee Rehabilitation Hospital in Philadelphia. And within a full year of doing rehabilitation and recovery, I was able to go back to college and finish my undergraduate degree with help of friends and family, and most particularly my mom, who came back to college with me for about a year of being the invisible mom on campus. As I'm sure you both can relate, oftentimes a lot of children and young people who have disabilities rely on the care and love of their parents to really get them where they need to go and steer them in the right direction. So after undergraduate, I was really passionate about studying art history. I moved to Arizona, and once living there among a community of people with disabilities and meeting a lot of people, I became really embedded in disability culture. I had not experienced what it was like to meet people who were born with their disabilities, who hadn't acquired them later in life, like someone like myself with a spinal cord injury. And that really changed a lot of things for me. My family ended up setting up a fundraiser to support quality of life programs, and that was called the Katie Samson Foundation. And we started this lacrosse festival that became the largest high school lacrosse event in the country, and that lasted about 19 years. Within that time, I've just devoted myself to arts administration, to working in museums and cultural institutions. Eventually, I found my path to working in disability rights and accessibility and inclusion in the arts, to where I found myself today, which I'm doing a lot of training and consulting in accessibility, both in the physical environment as well as in the digital space. So that's a lot, I'm in my mid-40s and thriving.
It's interesting because it's the second time where I've heard Arizona come up as sort of this place where people with disabilities can go to thrive. And at some point I'd be curious in hearing more of that. But I think in general, especially with your work in the arts and your background in that area, it's such a strong, important thing for our actors and our family members and the people we know with disabilities.
Yeah.
And are there ways that we can help increase the positivity and the opportunities for people within the arts for people with disabilities? It's sometimes there are barriers, and how we change those barriers, whether they're mental or physical. What can you information? What can you suggest? What do you know?
Yeah. Around 2018, I switched my job and started working at an organization that's based in Philadelphia called Outreach, which creates and advocates accessible opportunities in all arts and culture. And their mission really held a lot for me in the space that's where I found a lot of peace and healing and just community, learning from people with disabilities in arts and culture. And so I started to visit local theater companies and really understand what programs that they were doing and involved with. And I started not only to work within those arts and cultural organizations to train them into how they better serve people with disabilities, but also bringing in people from the disability community who could better teach and advocate and basically become community consultants within the theater space, both from the backstage side as well as, in front of the stage. What do arts and cultural organizations need to do to create positive, affirming experiences for people in the disability community? And that can look really different. And I can tell you, my most recent experience last winter was at Philadelphia Theater Company, where they brought me in to be a consultant on a play called Cost of Living. And I was hired as a disability community consultant to come in and work with the actors on how they perform and represent disability on stage as people with lived experience performing, as well as talking about, everything from buying a wheelchair for the set and like what type of wheelchair that might look like, to how we market and promote the show in a different way and the language we use to talk about it. So kind of all the sort of 365 approach to talking and experiencing the aspect of advocacy, representation, all of those things.
So it's interesting you mentioned the Philadelphia Theater Company and Cost of Living, because my son is very interested in acting. And one of the things that I find difficult, or at least constantly running up against, is this idea of, they say they're accessible, but what they mean is, well, you can come into the audience and watch. But the full accessibility of being part of the production and part of the core and being able to have people come and watch is something that the world seems to struggle with. And do you have any insight into how we can make some of those other changes that fully embrace the actors and the audience with really not accessibility, but full involvement?
Yeah, so much of it, I think, involves representation on all areas of the theater production, the community. Having people that are behind the scenes, that are making art and cultivating those experiences, to have that representation on both sides, I think is so crucial. And also having that advocacy voice that's saying, we have this incredible stage and performing area, and yet it's not accessible from the backstage. And so that only limits the amount of creativity you can bring into the space. And from what we know of all the people that we work with in this space, that disabled people are the most creative people in the world, because they have to fight and navigate so many barriers on a daily basis. And so those critical thinking skills and those problem solving and that creativity is so vital to theater and the arts in general. It's no wonder, some of the best content that we see that's coming out of that representation is really honoring that lived experience, because it's coming from a place of those in the community that know it and breathe it. I think from the advocacy sense, it I have a dear friend that's involved in the arts. Her name is Danny Rose, and she always says, turn your complainers into consultants. And so if you have community members that attend your theater or want to be performers in your theater, why not bring them into programming? Why not bring them into experiences? What I'm finding is that there is ample opportunity to have experiences, but oftentimes in a lot of arts and cultural organizations, they're segregated experiences. So they're very much earmarked towards, we have a group of people with autism who do their own programming and their own supportive arts. Well, why not integrate them with other, neurotypical students, neurodiverse students, like a blended experience? Because I think that type of reciprocal learning and reciprocal cultivation can be so worthwhile for both parties involved. So if we can cultivate that in the front of the stage and the back of the stage and all around, I think that's where we're going to find the most success.
That's true. And then when I'm thinking about, and I'm so glad that you mentioned, the backstage aspect of all of this, because, even thinking about AWB, we're right now looking at different theaters that, may be accessible, and wholly accessible is what you're talking about. Is the bathroom near where they're going to be going onto stage and exiting from the stage, or coming into the back of the theater? Those types of things. So when we're looking at theaters, what should we, consider as opposed to just, can we get in there? Can we do our play here?
Yeah, I think there's a difference between getting in and being a patron that's an audience member and finding a good seat and having a good experience, versus coming in from the backstage and having a dressing room that is accessible, having a working restroom that's accessible, having a soundboard that can be navigated by somebody with a mobility device, that there's the lighting and the technical aspect can be assessed. Now, granted, some of the booths and some of these places were built in a time pre-Americans with Disabilities Act. I often find that some of the theaters that I've looked at from the backstage area have tried to make some adjustments for wheelchair users, and yet we don't necessarily think about lighting and sound as also being a barrier of access. So oftentimes in the theater, it's like we keep the lights down low and everything's dark and no one can see everything, but that doesn't work for all people, especially those who are low vision or have, a spectrum of blindness in their experience. The same thing with, deaf actors in the deaf community, being able to not have a lot of walls and a lot of barriers, but maybe kind of open system or mirrors in places where people can sign in different directions. I've been incredibly impressed by some of the inclusively designed spaces at Gallaudet University. That campus is absolutely remarkable, and it's really taken into account people with multiple disabilities. There is a sense that we as a disability community have somewhat of an obligation to advocate on the behalf of the full community and not just for our own individual access needs. And that's where I see the growth coming into AWB, is these young kids that are not only learning how to empower themselves, but also their community as well, because they're acting with like-minded people and they're performing with like-minded people, and we are stronger together in that representation.
Very true. It's like a microcosm, if you will. And we have so many young actors who are very interested in continuing, potentially into a career within the theater or performing in some way or sense, whether it's, on stage or behind the camera or in front of the camera. What advice would you give to them in terms of, building a career in performing arts?
I don't know if I have the best advice. I think it's interesting to learn all aspects of arts and cultural organizations and theater organizations, from the administrative skills that it takes to put something together, the fundraising aspect to it. Because if you are developing these skills to be a quote unquote performer, but you're also developing incredible skills that can transcend not just the experience of acting on stage, but being a really excellent public speaker, being able to be in a leadership role amongst a group of people, having the ability to take direction and follow through with that direction, I think is really, really valuable. There are so many aspects of being involved in an organized theater and ensemble that I think that sort of teamwork mentality is really important. And also just the sense that learning things like improvisation has gone tremendously well, because you never know what path life is going to take, especially living with a disability, and that ability to bounce back better than maybe before. We learned so many of those skills in improv when you sort of like yes and somebody to accept the role that you're given on stage and the conflict that ensues in that great improvisational activities that you learn in the theater community, that I think some of those skill sets can transcend in so many areas. And I think as you get older and as you age into acting and performing, you start to learn that like maybe not being in front of the stage is the thing that I have to do, but writing or creating sound or movement, it trickles into so many different areas that I think it's important for our young people not to limit ourselves by thinking like, I just have to be on stage and shouting out to the rooftops. Yeah.
I think that's really important, because the more opportunities or experience they get, the more they can create their own opportunities. If the role is not out there for you, well, write the role, create your own YouTube videos. I'm a big proponent of, there's, like you said, there's multiple disciplines within the arts world. You don't have to be on stage. But the more you know, the more you're able to sort of create your own opportunities or, direct your own future, and not sit there waiting for someone to come and say, would you like to do this? Or I have this for you. So I like that fact about the arts. And I think, something we should probably work on more is expanding these other areas. Like I said, Will has started out as an actor. Now he's an assistant director because he wants to learn that side of it, and in some ways prefers it. So letting him out of the box we created for him, although it was a very nice box, it's a good thing. So I know in previous conversations with you, we've talked about the inclusion and disabilities, but we also had a discussion about the senses. And people are used to the 5 senses, hearing, touch, sight, sound, taste. But you had talked once before about another sense. Could you illuminate us?
Yeah, absolutely.
And expand on that?
Yeah. In 2019, I had I woke up one morning with acute labyrinthitis and sudden neural hearing loss, which is was basically a virus that attacked my inner ear, and overnight I became profoundly deaf in my right ear, and I had what was called vestibular nerve damage. Now, I didn't know anything about the vestibular system, but it actually is another sense, your vestibular sense, which is basically considered your balance nerve. And so everything was thrown out of whack. And within that time, I started learning a lot more about people who were neurodiverse or neurospicy, as some of my friends like to say, who also experience other types of sensory loss that I don't think we talk very often about. We, in kindergarten, learn about the 5 senses, and it's sort of like, and then you're sold, but yet we actually have more senses than just beyond the vestibular sense, that balance sense. We have our proprioceptive sense, or our body's way to recognize, its own movement, and how we move about the space and feel our body as it's moving. And so the vestibular and proprioceptive really deal with gravity. And some people are born with needing more gravity or less gravity. And then lastly, I'll say that I learned a lot more about interoception, or sort of our body's ability to recognize its own urges, sort of the hidden sense within our bodies, which we don't really know too much about where it comes from, most likely the brain. But, we're talking about hunger, thirst, bowel and bladder function, all those things. But like the fact that we get embarrassed and we blush, or we get like high blood pressure, all of those sort of ways in which our body responds can be on a various different spectrum. And so I think there's an opportunity for theater to involve more of these senses and tap into them in a way. I had an incredible experience working with the Philadelphia Ballet, and we did a really amazing collaborative program with the Center for Creative Works. And most of the dancers and performing artists from CCW had intellectual disabilities who were non-speaking, and yet they could respond to choreography, they could move, and they could dance. And oftentimes we would communicate through movement rather than verbally. And it was just a really great way to see how much we were tapping into their own creativity as performers and artists without speaking. And that just really goes to show how that outside of the box thinking that I think theater just really gets so much more than a lot of the other arts and cultural organizations that I've worked with.
I love that. I mean, that's amazing. And I was just, I might stray a little bit from this topic.
Stray.
Stray away.
Okay. And I'm thinking now in terms of people outside of, able-bodied people in general, from a politically correct standpoint. I know some of us may struggle with ways in which to communicate about physical disabilities, or any disabilities for that matter. And I'm wondering, appropriateness that we can help with in terms of advocating for our community, to be able to help people to know what are the proper ways in which to communicate about disabilities and people with disabilities.
People with disabilities identify themselves however they feel most comfortable. And I think it's really important that people with disabilities really take the lead on how they want to be identified in the language that they use. I will say there are some generalizations that the disability community just overall has come up with that I think are sort of the way that we can level set language and stop using words like handicap, right? I mean, that term is completely outdated. It's kind of ableist at this point. It refers more to parking spaces and elevators than it does actually human beings. So let's just all agree to maybe stop using it, or to shy away from it, or use it maybe in reference to parking spots. But I always prefer the term accessible, right? Because it actually speaks to what it's doing. It's making that area more accessible for people with disabilities. So accessible parking, accessible elevator, accessible space. I have access needs, right? I think for the most part, I'm really strongly advocating for people talking about apparent disabilities and non-apparent disabilities, because there are many disabilities out there that can't be seen by sight. And then there's often people with disabilities that have disabilities that they are proud of or they're willing to share, and it's not their choice. So they're not hiding them. They're not invisible. They're just, for whatever reason, or maybe it's more like intellectual or cognitive type of disability. So I think that apparent and non-apparent is really great language to try to hold on to. I tend to toggle between person first language, identifying myself as a person with a disability, a person who uses a wheelchair. And then oftentimes I will use identity first language, like I am a wheelchair user, I am a quadriplegic, I am a, I think there's there's ways in which we just kind of take the lead by the examples and models that other people are reflecting back on us, and that's the way to go. And when in doubt, it's okay to ask, right? I think it's okay to ask how someone wants to be identified with their disability, and not just assume that you know, and also not to ask what happened to somebody, right? We are not defined by our trauma. We are not defined by all of the impairments that might be apparent or might be non-apparent. And so that story isn't our whole story. And I think it's really important that you get to know someone first, and you maybe over the course of a few days or a few months or a few years before, you know, that story gets told. And oftentimes the story is not even a story. And so that we don't have to be defined by some sort of inspirational narrative that we've triumphed over evil or conquered a battle. This is something that I think most people are living through, and will be living through and continue to live through their whole lives. And the more we can come away from that narrative of we are overcoming obstacles, because frankly, this obstacle isn't going anywhere.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, I appreciate that. And thank you so much for that insight. It's always, you know, difficult for people to really maneuver across the ways in which people want to be identified in a broad sense, but then also within the physically disabled or the disabled community, it really becomes even more difficult. And I can remember the other day, we were talking about the Hero Award Gala coming up, and just kind of discussing, you know, where it was going to be and so forth with some friends of mine. And she came back with a text to me that kind of said, you know, it's so wonderful that you're involved with those who are less fortunate. And that kind of struck me as not appropriate. And I didn't really know how to respond to that, because I don't really look at people as being more or less fortunate than others. You know, we have different things that we're dealing with, but I would not say less fortunate would be a word that would be appropriate. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is difficult. It is challenging. I'm often advocating for disability organizations to try to change that narrative of the charity model, and moving towards a space that we can honor both the social model of disability that recognizes that there's barriers in society that make our world more disabling, and then also this sort of affirmation model that we can create and cultivate really positive, affirming experiences that recognize disability as just, you know, part of a whole, and not the only thing. And you know, oftentimes we say things like underrepresented communities or undersourced communities or things like that, and there's never really the right term to identify, you know, it's like marginalized, right? But or the largest minority in the world, disabled people. So that doesn't even really seem to fit very well. And
Right.
Marginalized from what, right? And so I think it's really difficult. But you know, there's an opportunity to have, as an educator, I say these teachable moments. Sometimes it's worth the fight to have a conversation with that person, or reconstruct that narrative in a way that can be helpful. But then oftentimes it can be exhausting to try to have those conversations day in and day out. So you kind of have to pick and choose.
Fighting every fight is exhausting. But it's interesting that what is being pointed out when dealing with people with disabilities is usually something that we all deal with in just a different way. So we're all less fortunate in a way. I'm not as tall as I want to be, probably not as rich as I want to be. I'm less fortunate. But it becomes the focus of the people where it's, if they have a disability, that shouldn't be the focus of what you're focusing on them. It's because we all have something. Years ago, I took a course, and I remember trying to explain to someone that my son hasn't changed. He is who he's always been. I'm the one who's changed through this experience, and recognizing that he's not fortunate or less, he's fortunate in that he has a mother that loves him. He is not less fortunate because he's in a wheelchair. I'm glad we live in a world where there are power wheelchairs, but it's not a reflection on him or a way in which to treat him, because he is who he is. He also has the habit of reminding people that the disability community is the one minority that anybody can join at any time. Mm-hmm. And so when you view people as less fortunate or less able or less this or less that, you could be there someday. And when he was very young, I used to go into school at the beginning of the year. He and I would go in and talk to his classmates. And one of the first things that was asked was, do you know anyone who uses a cane or wears glasses or a wheelchair? And the two second and third graders' hands would shoot up about aunts and uncles and grandparents. And it was just this thing of, this is not different. This is who he is. You know people like this. And the idea, and I'm not explaining this well, I know that, but the idea that what you're seeing in someone else is what you're focusing on, and putting a label to it or a name to it, you're not seeing the person. And whatever name or label you put on anybody can be put on yourself in some aspect of your life. I don't know how you change that. Like you said, it's exhausting fighting every battle, and you pick and choose your battles. But trying to change that dynamic, I would say we're going to conquer the world one wheelchair ramp at a time. Let's get another one put in. So things like saying less fortunate, and again, trying to remember where people are coming from and understanding, but any chance to educate a little bit is helpful. I'm not explaining this well, but
no, that's perfect.
Hopefully you understand what I'm saying.
I recently heard a term that I've come to adopt a bit more, which is radical incrementalism. And I really love the term because it sort of speaks to, we're not going to solve it in one day. And right. This is something, these types of biases and ableism have existed for centuries. And yet, just speaking to all of you today and getting this message out, maybe it's going to change the mind of one or two people who will change the mind of another person, that it is, this sort of radical act of saying that we belong in all spaces and we belong to be breathing and voting and out in public. That's another one. It's like, good to see you out and about in the world. I'm like, where else would I be? Locked up in a closet. Yeah.
Well, one of the approaches Will and I take to life is being politely unreasonable. That if you ask for something and somebody thinks you're unreasonable, well, you become politely unreasonable. There's nothing wrong with saying, well, I hear you, but your doorway's not wide enough. And I'm sorry I'm blocking the aisle, but the only chair I could, the only place at the table I could sit at was taken by somebody who doesn't care. And so the approach of being, just because someone else thinks it's unreasonable doesn't mean it is. And you're allowed to be politely unreasonable and say, well, that's true, but let's do this. And sometimes you can get change that way. So
well, Katie,
Lisa, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Katie, thank you so much. But do you have another question, Mary?
So, and maybe this goes back to the universal accessibility. I did have, years ago, I looked at a house that a friend had built for their son who had cerebral palsy, because I was getting ready to do renovations. And what I realized was none of their improvements, very few of their improvements really worked for my son, because they were just different. And as I renovate houses and make things more accessible for my son, I realized how uniquely small changes can make a huge difference. There's universal accessibility, but then there is that, if you can just do this, then it opens up this. I don't know how to get the world to see things a little differently, to make things more inclusive without having to be politely unreasonable all the time. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on sort of the universal accessibility and making it, hey, I conform to the letter of the law, but yes, we're really open and accessible.
There's so many aspects of universal design that were created in a way that almost make it difficult to recognize that it's good design, in the fact that seamlessly go into a grocery store and the doors just open automatically. So you don't really think about the barrier that exists. When you're at an airport and you walk into perhaps a women's restroom, there are no doors, right? You take one turn and then another turn, and you're in a private space, sort of like you maze in to a restroom. And a lot of that is about like spreading germs. So you're not like touching things and handling things, as well as wheelchair accommodation, as well as cane navigation and so many other aspects. And it's the seamlessness of design that gives that sense of you don't even recognize it's good design because it's so effortless to navigate those spaces. And when we're creating spaces in that way, that seamlessness goes unrecognized, it almost makes it more difficult. And so I think what I find interesting is the way that we can make accessibility noticeable and universal at the same time. And I think some ways that I've seen arts organizations do that is really interesting. And it's almost like forcing access upon non-disabled people, but kind of opening them up to be like, well, that could actually work for me too. So like, or that could work for my restaurant, or that could work for my local business, right? So, going to a bar that, yes, has lots of bar stool heights and bar stool seating, but also has a lower counter space that I could just like wheel up and order from. And yet it works for so many people, and it works for their deliveries, and it works for, other aspects as well. I think some of the things that I've also noticed that have been so impactful for the blind and low vision community is seeing where I've worked in public gardens and nature preserves, and where they've put railings in for people to look out on a vista to see, birds or a landscape. And along the railing, they've actually embedded braille that interpret what the person may be seeing on any given season. And yet you would just be sort of walking and maybe holding your hand along the railing and not notice it as a sighted person. But for a braille user, that can be a tremendous aspect of inclusion that may not have been thought about. And so I think it opens us up to create spaces where we didn't necessarily think about. And so there's aspects of inclusive design or universal design that I think are incredible. I also think it's important to recognize that when we amplify accessibility and we kind of force it into a space and make it known, that's where we're going to really push that change. And so it's a balance. It's a balancing act. Everybody should take the ramp. There shouldn't be stairs and a ramp. It should be all ramps all the time, right? Or no ramps, right? Like, do we really need curbs? I was just in a place in South Baltimore recently, in the Baltimore Peninsula, where the entire space, the entire structure, there are no curbs anywhere. And so it just kind of begs the question, like, do we really need them if there's proper drainage and proper grates? And let's redesign all urban spaces, right?
Well, Katie, you continue to inspire many of us, and we so appreciate the work that you're doing, your creativity, the way in which you think about the world and accessibility and inclusiveness. And we're just so grateful that you have agreed to accept the honor from AWB to be our honoree for this year. And we look forward to working with you even more.
Thank you, Lisa and Mary. This has been such an honor to be a part of this experience, to get to know both of you a little bit more. And also, I just can't wait to spend more time with the actors and to really learn more about where AWB is going in the future and continue the relationship. I'm not one of those people that just, snags an award and like runs off into the sunset. I'm, you kind of got me for life now.
We're stuck with you. Is that what we're hearing?
Yeah.
Well, we
You're
love
stuck with
that
me.
thought.
No, it's been really wonderful.
And I
Thank
know
you.
that the actors would love it too.
Really appreciate this conversation and look forward to talking to all of you soon. Thank you.
Absolutely. And if you want to
Thank
learn more
you.
about AWB, just tune in to the box below, which has our website address included there, www.actingwithoutboundaries.org.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Acting Without Boundaries, a unique performing arts programs for people with physical disabilities, transforming lives and building self-esteem in an empowering community of people with physical disabilities through theater that celebrates ability. To learn more, please visit www.actingwithoutboundaries.org.
Nah, wrong. I got to start over.
Fine.
Bloop me already.
I was really, oh God, this is taking so long. I'm like, how do I
Okay.
I am excited. I am excited to be here. Let's get going.
I feel
Hi,
like
everyone.
I'm looking down. Okay.